F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred.
All right, thank you. Now that we've got our standard disclaimer out of the way, here's a peek at today's agenda and our discussion topics. We'll have a brief discussion and sharing here some reminders for our fiscal year 16 and 17 cohorts. And then your program officer, Angela, will share some timeline snapshots related to grantees, participants, and the budget, and have a few reminders for you about exiting participants. We're going to save some time for some peer-to-peer discussion about some things that are top of mind for you today. And then, of course, we'll wrap it up with our reminders and upcoming events. And of course, our end of session survey, where you can tell us your thoughts about today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to your program officer, Miss Angela Hernandez.
Thank you, Synergy team. I appreciate all of your support. Welcome, everybody. I hope you're having a good day, a good Friday, of course, and hope that I can help you make it a good Friday with some of the information I'll talk about today. I want to jump right in, if we can go to the next slide. And I know there's just a few of you in this category, but because I know some of our grantees have multiple cohorts, this is just a small reminder that of late, any FY 2016 grants that were on a no-cost extension, for the most part, you know who you are and whether your grant has ended. And if it has in this no-cost extension period or is about to, just a reminder about due dates for that final performance report. And I did resend that guidance letter to folks just a few weeks ago. So I just kind of wanted to put it on your radar. And the same goes for at least one of our grantees in the FY17 cohort. And I know we have a couple of no cost extensions in that cohort as well. So just wanted to, again, call those to your attention and keep those participation, or those deadlines rather, on file for your information. Next slide, please. So what I want to talk about today, and actually I'll just pause and say hi to Karen. Thank you, Karen, for joining. And I'm just referring to Karen Schroll, who, as many of you know, is my counterpart supporting the professional development program data collection system with ANLAR Westat. So I'm glad you're on, because we'll be walking through things that tangentially, of course, touch on how folks report. I am going to just caveat my remarks today by just sharing that I have a little person in the room who's enjoying an after-school snack, and I think sometimes it's kind of loud. So just want to qualify that there as we move ahead. So talking about what's sitting here in front of us, I wanted to spend a little bit of time with all of you today, just sharing and kind of having a conversation. And this is really based on a lot of frequently asked questions I've had of late. It's things that we know we've probably all talked about or shared before, but it's the things you forget about until you're kind of in the moment and in that activity and needing to recall sort of what the guidance is. So I just wanted to spend a little time talking about discrete parts of the project, and based on roles, meaning you as a grantee or the participant, sort of what's happening, what's going on, and what you should be thinking or be doing, or what you should be guiding your participants to be doing. And I'm speaking in generalities because, as you guys know, there's highly variable activity depending on the nature of your training, the length of your training, the scope of your training, and whether it's for teachers. And I have teachers here because that's really going to be my focus. But, administrators certainly have, of course, a parallel trajectory. So, feel free as we talk to throw some questions in there as we come up. I may not pause until I kind of get through each slide, but it's really in anticipation of wanting to make sure that there's clarity around sort of how we talk about these, again, sort of discrete phases of the project. And one thing I want to call to your attention when I'm talking to you guys as a group, I tend to be mindful of the fact, and you see it from this chart here, that some of you have things like 1-year teacher programs. Some of you have some that take 2.5 years. And that's by virtue of the requirements that are state specific or region specific. And so, you're not all necessarily starting or finishing training or starting induction at the same time. And I'm not really going to spend time or emphasize, some of those things like delays that happen certainly with participants. I'm really thinking about the fidelity of a project of keeping within that 5 years. So just know that that's what I'm talking about, which does not mean you do not have flexibility, but I kind of just want to set a context there for my remarks today. Next slide. So again, talking about different roles and what people more or less should be doing during these across, and throughout the 5 years. This is really with a focus on the 21s, but certainly you're going to see yourselves in this FY18 cohort grantees as we talk through this. So for participants, of course, years 1 and 2, and I say it's definitely, for a number of you, it's year 2 for the FY21 cohort by virtue of the timing of our grant cycle. You're looking at, enrolling your participants either full-time or part-time, depending on what your scope of your approved application said that it would do. Of course, they're signing a service payback agreement, whether digital or paper. And they're logging into the PDP DCS. And, we're seeing, and you as the grantee are seeing that their status is, logged in, and that there's no login or awaiting login status, meaning they've gone in, they've verified the contact information, they've verified as it begins to accumulate the training costs. And understanding the length of service payback that they are bound to as they progress through their training. The training, as I mentioned, might take place from years 1 all the way to 3, and yes, sometimes beyond, depending on delays and things like small little things like COVID. But in essence, when we talk about training, we're talking about completing all graduation requirements, meaning what are the program requirements that you set forth in your specific teacher training program or administrator training program in order for them to achieve or to earn a degree? And so that's discrete from what we talk about, as you guys know, from licensure requirements. And so that's a really important distinction. And I want to draw that because typically you as a program tend to not require licensure in order for them to earn a degree. So I want to make sure that we hold those sort of mutually exclusive when we're talking here. But, then, again, they're logging into the PDP DCS and, once they've been exited from the system, they're again verifying that all of their information that they've accumulated to date through the training is correct. And I'm going to pause and just say that one of the questions that I know I tend to get is, I've got a participant who has yet to finish the internship portion of the requirement, or they have one course left and they haven't done it yet. And, if you will, they're kind of skipping a semester and maybe they have to wait till the fall to do it or the spring for whatever reason, whatever the rationale is that happens. One of the questions that I come back with to a grantee when they say, what do I do with this person? Are they exited? Are they not? And I say, what status are they in your school, in your institution? Are they, enrolled? Is there some sort of other category? Is it leave of absence? In any case, I would tell you they have not completed the training. And so for as long as your grant is active and they have that remaining course or internship, again, graduation requirement to complete in order to earn their degree, I would tell you to not exit them without completion, because 9 times out of 10, they're going to do it. They're just delayed for whatever any host of reasons they're delayed for. And if you did exit them, that would move them directly into debt referral and ultimately collection, which is probably not what we want to do when they're that close to a degree and licensure. So in the PDP DCS, we don't want to be considering individuals like that for referral. So I would tell you, leave them as enrolled. It might be, and many of you have had discussions with me like this in the past of, you know, maybe I need a leave of absence for this person. There's a specific reason that you know, necessitates that status, and that's fine. But again, I would tell you not to exit them. Now, that said, and I'll just take FY17 grantees as an example, they're wrapping up. So once that project, your grant period has ended, so for 17 grantees, let's say for the one who ends on time, it's ending August 30. In fact, it ended August 31st of this year. They would have to exit, everyone. They would have to exit because it's the end of the grant period. You can't provide any more support. And so everyone, regardless of status, regardless of, they're only one class away, they have to be exited when you officially decide to end the grant. Now, what are some remedies to that? We have a number of 16 grantees and we have a couple of 17 grantees that have asked for and received a no-cost time extension, so that they have those extra months to accommodate allowing some of their participants to finish training that they've never finished. You can absolutely do that. You know, the caveat, as I've mentioned in the past, is about your resources, meaning your time and effort, or the time and effort of the individual on your end grantee who will be tasked with having to, you know, write a final performance report, you know, submit that to us, finalize the data in the PDP DCS. So just keep those things in mind, that a no-cost extension is certainly possible because it's about finishing, right? It's about finishing something that wasn't finished during the original project period. It's not about starting a new scope of work, but NCEs would absolutely be allowed for, you know, trying to support the completion of training for one or more participants. So I wanted to raise that because that was a question that I know that's come up. Under placement and induction. So when we talk about induction, yes, induction should be something, an activity that occurs for an individual once, you know, in PDP DCS language, after they have been exited with completion, right? So it's after they're done with the training. Induction services is really their path. There are multiple things happening during that time. For many, right after graduation, it's obtaining state licensure if they haven't already. It's, you know, pursuing, identifying, and getting placed, and then working in a qualifying job. It's always and often logging into the PDP DCS to report employer information and to start working toward getting the credit. And part of that process is them alerting the employer of their role and responsibilities, the employer's role and responsibilities, and helping them get that verification. And it's the constant check-in by the participant into the system to make sure that the employer is doing their part and that that's happening. Because as you guys know by now from all the conversations we've had with many of you over the summer, and Karen and her team at the help desk, you know, we've got a lot of folks where that loop is just not getting closed. And it's not because you haven't done your due diligence of, you know, reminding them. It's that, you know, at the end of the day, it's individual agency. They've got to go in and do it. And the only thing we ever ask of you is just making sure you've documented your good faith effort to get them to that place. But they've got to, you know, sort of close that loop. And that takes a lot of proactive effort on their part. Again, a few of you new grantees I know have one-year programs, either because they're an administrator training program, or in some cases, there are teacher programs that are only 1 year, depending on your state. And so in those cases, as you recruit, I would be conveying that information now. You know, I would be conveying that information today as you recruit and letting them know that right after this, you know, you've got to do all these steps. And I would start at the, you know, early and often in communicating that message. The same would go again for our FY18 cohort, where you have a number of folks that they're still in training, but they're getting toward that tail end if they aren't already exited. And so you also want to be communicating to them what this expectation is, so that they know as they're starting to look, they can be starting these conversations with their prospective employers about what they need to be able to get that employer verification checked off. And again, you know, they're doing that until service payback obligation is fulfilled. So I want to raise another point that gets kind of squishy, and that's in this section around placement and induction, this particular phase, because a lot of stuff is happening, as we said, you know, and I know especially given the situation with COVID, and even before then, as we know, you know, we have such a huge transition and turnover and attrition of teachers. We've got a lot of folks, I think, emerging with, you know, and you guys have been sharing this with me, and I appreciate it, with provisional licensure. And so, you know, we don't consider that as them having met all the requirements. We're still expecting they're going to get full state licensure. But a couple of things happen with this provisional licensure from what I've understood and heard from many of you. So I want to talk about a couple of situations, a couple of scenarios, and their implications for getting credit, service payback credit, for those provisional licensure employment issues. So first, I know I've heard of a few situations or circumstances where somebody's still in training, you know, because maybe they have a course left or two, they've got almost all their stuff met, but they haven't obtained state licensure. Maybe they don't even have the degree yet, but they're so desperate in that region for teachers that they're going ahead and hiring these people on provisional basis. And, you know, that's certainly not a bad thing in terms of, you know, they're getting people that are near ready, but I want to make sure that we're really clear about the guidance around when they can earn service payback credit. So when they are in training, the simple response is they cannot earn service payback credit, not even retroactively, not when they were in, and that's simply because in our system, and it's not because a function of it is in the system, but it's by statute, the expectation is that they are in fact completing everything and then getting the job placement. In the PDP DCS, you cannot have or request service payback credit for any kind of time period that precedes your exit with completion date in the system. And Karen, you want to just kind of shake your hand yes or verify yes, that's the case, right? So that would be a problem. They'd have trouble trying to get the credit for that because it won't fly in the system. So that's number one. And they can't ask for it later again because you will have given them a certain exit date. And that's the benefit, frankly, of giving them more time to finish, to get their full licensure. But in the meantime, they can't ask for credit for that. Again, any kind of teaching that they might be doing, however legitimate, as provisional, before they have completed the training. So I just want to be really clear about that. However, there's another scenario. The second scenario is after training, meaning they've graduated, you know, and I will say and you guys know, there's this sort of funky, 6 to 12 months, sometimes a little longer period where they're done. They're, preparing for whatever exams or other licensure requirements there are, whether it's the praxis or other tests that are state-based, or both. I know it's highly variable across your states, but after the training, if they then get a job and again, it's a provisional licensure job. And let's say I get a job in August. I don't have a state licensure. I have a provisional license. I've finished my training. I have my degree, but I have yet to pass the test. Then I start teaching as a provisional teacher, a licensed teacher, and through December. And in December, I get my license. So come January, they've gone ahead and hired me permanently in that position, beginning January of 2022. Do I get credit for that September to December period? Yes, you do, because you have finished your training. You're provisional, but we would consider it retroactive because you have completed the training portion. So, and it's after you've been exited with completion. So I just want to be really clear about when you can and when you cannot earn service payback credit in that sort of provisional teacher status. Again, I want to be clear, we would not give you credit as a provisional teacher retroactively or otherwise until you get full state licensure. So you can't go 2 years as a provisional and say, do I get credit for all of this and call it a day? No, the expectation is that you get full credit once you've achieved state licensure, but it really kind of buys you time to try to get that full state license. Now, if you go beyond those 12 months that we talk about, those magic 12 months after training, and you're still in a provisional status, still trying to pass the test, but you haven't yet, there is the possibility that you'll get contacted by us saying, hey, you haven't put in, and I'm really addressing a participant here, you haven't put in any requests for service payback credit. Are you working? What's going on? We can't always be reliant on you, the grantee, to know that. They might tell us, yeah, we're teaching. So we would definitely want them to be proactive, if they get that kind of contact from us, that they're letting us know, hey, don't send me to, defer to debt referral yet, because I'm still trying to get it. I've got this provisional license. We're willing to work with them to try to give them as much time as possible on that, knowing that, again, that might just take some time. But I think that gets into some more complicated territory as we go down the line. At some point, there's a threshold. I will say that, and in rare cases, particularly in our older cases, we've seen where somebody's come back after being referred for debt to Treasury and said, hey, I have been teaching, here's my stuff, let me know, or, can I get service payback credit? We do pull those cases back. And yes, ultimately they can receive the service payback in a reduction in any kind of cash payback obligation that they have. However, I can almost guarantee you that when we refer them to Treasury, they're still going to have some degree of debt by virtue of penalties and fees that may have been incurred as a result of them being referred for in the first place, and if they're not responsive. So I won't go into those details today, but just trying to help you guys understand, because I know there's a lot of this provisional licensure out there, and I want to make sure you guys are clear in the guidance to them about that. Let me see, did I get any questions on that? Okay. Yeah, that's right, Carmelita. So I know we've got a lot of these folks with the status of internships have been delayed, right? As by virtue of not being able to go into an actual classroom and whatnot. So that's, and sometimes it's policy. So if it's a higher ed policy, meaning your institution said, hey, we're not letting any of you go into a school, you should let us know, because that's really important for us to understand. And when I say let us know, in an annual performance report, in those required reporting, where that allows us to understand, oh, that's why there are all these delays, or this, sort of limbo that some of your folks are in. Let's go to the next. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
There was one kind of clarifying question. Someone asked, so the limit is 12 months on a provisional, but not with respect to qualifying payback, correct? It just gives the participant more time to attain the license and avert debt collection.
So I'm not going to say 12 months is a hard, it's an example that I was just giving in this context. I mean, I think, again, it's back to sort of the timing, the consideration, the nature of the issue, and under what circumstances, or the likelihood. And that's something that becomes a participant to department conversation at the end of the day, because I would imagine that some of those conversations may very well tend to be conversations that take place after your grant period has ended. Now, it could take place for a lot of you 18s as early as next year, right? It just depends. So, I mean, I think Karen and the team have made really great effort to try to understand sort of the nature of some of these kinds of issues and connecting with you all about, people that don't have fulfillment in progress. But yes, they're not going to stay in limbo forever is the short answer. At some point, they will get referred. On what basis is going to be a case-by-case basis, because the reality is that doesn't tend to happen too often. But I just wanted to raise that as a possibility. If you see that that's a dynamic of lots of people getting hired as provisional, then that's something I would like to know about so that we can make sure that we're prepared to address those issues going forward. And that way they know what to expect. If I just find out suddenly that a whole cohort went in as provisional teachers, that could become a bigger issue. And we'll have to address it, I'm sure, through some kind of, probably non-regulatory guidance in the short term, but potentially regulatory in the longer term. We're just in this crazy time. It's a matter of how long the crazy continues, right? In terms of pandemic. So I won't go into that story today because we want to keep it a happy Friday. Let's go to let's talk about you guys now, the grantee, a little bit, and go back. I'm sorry. So this is, you all know, you've been doing what's in that first column or the second column of recruitment, your meetings, all that good stuff, or you will be doing it by the end of, before the end of next year, depending on the cycle and where you land in terms of placing your folks in year one. And then the training, again, that training period, just, keeping track of those costs is really critical. Meeting those annual reporting deadlines is really critical. Adjusting the participant status as needed, depending on the progress. So, you'll know right away about leaves of absence, exiting without completion, et cetera. And if that's a conversation you kind of want to discuss one or two participants and you want to know where should they be landing, in terms of status, happy to have those conversations with you to clarify that before you run and do it. And it turns out to be something that you didn't want in the system. And then again, making sure, I just want to be really clear, you apply service payback only for the months that they're actually in training. So it's not a given that, they're in for an academic year. I don't expect 12 months necessarily, unless they are in there for the entire summer, as well as, fall and semester course periods. I want to just give two brief reminders on this, and that is timeliness in submitting a recipient. Karen and the team have talked about this, I know, in trainings, and we usually remind you during performance reporting season, but it's super important that anybody that you've put in there, that you do not leave in pending status. For us, we care because we need to be able to report on the cohort as completely as possible. And that performance reporting data that Karen needs to collect and aggregate and analyze and send to me is what we ultimately send to Congress to inform Congress about the progress of this program. For you, it would be detrimental to leave it in pending status, because if we see it and nobody does anything about it, we expunge that file. And that means you have to do that work all over again of entering that data, which I don't want to see happen to anybody. So please be diligent and good about not leaving participants in pending status. And then timeliness in exiting an individual. So I know for some, for example, like this past summer, I know it's the last thing on your minds, but it's really critical for us to be able to see if somebody's been exited in May, i.e. graduation. We can't wait until August to see that reflected. You have to do that right away. And the reason you have to do that right away, and the reason it's important, I can tell you in this last year, it had implications for non-competitive continuation awards. You know, if I see people not moving along or not making progress, I'm using your last available data and I see it's not been updated, then that leads me to believe that the work's not progressing. And again, it's an inaccurate accounting when we have to make those award decisions. So please be sure to update those things often and early. And by often, for many of you, you know, it's on whatever, you know, again, cycle of the academic year you're on, whether quarterly or semester, in order to be able to make sure that it's reflecting the latest and greatest in terms of cost and service payback time incurred. Okay, next slide. So, quick reminders. What do I do when my participants are exiting the program? Well, it depends on whether we're talking about exiting without completion. So, i.e. they didn't finish the training, you know they're not going to finish, or you're leaving, or your project has ended. The grant period has ended and you will not be able to reflect any progress, even if they're almost done. They should expect to be contacted by PDP DCS to confirm cash payback. The department will forward their account to Treasury, and U.S. Department of Treasury, again, debt collection will contact the participant. And if they don't respond to Treasury, that's when, you know, the problems of penalties and fees begin. Again, you want to, this is really focused on those folks that are likely to be exited prior to the end of your grant period, you know, for whatever reason, academic performance, other, that they're leaving. You need to be able to share this with them as quickly as possible and make sure that they know that. Next slide, please. And for informing exit, or participants rather, who exit with completion, this is that 12-month sort of, you know, grace period of, you know, they have up to 12 months to enter that employer information and begin accruing service payback obligation credit. They should be alerting that employer of their roles and responsibilities in verifying employment for credit, and they should be checking the PDP DCS to make sure that it reflects what they think it should reflect about their time and cost. And, you know, again, as long as they're good about consistently going back to it to make sure the loop's been closed, they're good. It's failure to consistently address that could result in their being referred. So again, something for them to be aware of. Next slide, please.
Angela, before we move on, I think there was a question in the chat. It was, as a new grantee, do you recommend that I set a calendar reminder for like a week after their planned graduation date or graduate date to check on it? And
yeah, so that's a great question, Allison. I would say a couple of things. One is, you know, for me, I have a written calendar, an electronic calendar, I have alarms, and I still sometimes forget my kids' PTA meeting. So, you know, I say you do whatever you need to do to make sure that you remember sort of these key dates, right? So yes, I would say, you know, set yourself a reminder after a term, whether, you know, within a week or 2 weeks. And I would tell you, you know, do it, set it not for, you know, the day after, knowing that you're probably not going to get to it, number one, the day after. And number two, I'd also say be in tune to what the sort of your finance office, or in your case, your partner's finance office is and their readiness to share out what the actual expenditures are, right? So just to make sure that, budgets and numbers are reconciled before you bother to enter them into the system. And I would say if you guys come back and tell me, hey, Angela, I'm one of those that, I didn't enter it in May, I didn't do it until August, because my finance office took that long, that's also good for me to know in an APR, and so I know some of you guys have, offices where they might tell you, too bad, Allison, I do it every quarter and I don't do it anytime different than that. So, figure it out. If that's what the case is, then, again, putting that kind of contextual information is really helpful. And I see, Renuka, typically we need to wait until the degree is posted. Yeah, so there might be conditions, right, that have to be met, whether we're talking about the complete end of training or even by term, so whatever that is, to know that cycle, so that I'm not sitting here wondering why have they not done this, is important for us to know. Next slide, please. So budget. So kind of, this was just more or less of a role and more just, what's happening with the budget as we're going through these same phases. So in years 1 and 2, you're spending the money, you're spending that training money, and we hope all of it, right? Just incurring all of those expenses, both direct and training based, related to recruitment and direct costs. And just remember, recruitment activities cannot be applied to training costs. Those are your direct costs. I just want to make sure people are clear. And I think for the most part, you are. And then training costs themselves, what all of those allowable costs are. They're laid out pretty explicitly, both in the NIA and in program regulations. I've shared this, but I'll keep sharing it. Tuition, books, and fees are okay in the event you've got a participant who might not technically be considered full-time. Those things can be paid for somebody who may not be considered full-time. However, somebody who is not in the status of full-time as defined by your institution or institutions, if you have partners, cannot receive stipends or dependent allowance. So they must be full-time and must work less than 20 hours per week. And so again, that information is in the NIA, and the exact amounts or maximum allowances are also available in the notice inviting applications for your respective cohorts. So look in your respective notices inviting applications, depending on the year you were awarded, for that guidance. Direct costs, of course, for a grantee, personnel, travel, supplies, contract, etc. And then we have induction costs, which, as you know, in your last couple of years, you're given far less money because the training money is gone, presumably. And you have costs that are pretty much only direct in order to support induction. They should not be applied to training costs. And for those of you that have that carryover, right, those available funds because of delayed training, et cetera, you're really using that carryover, that unused funding balance in years 4 or 5, to the extent you have any delayed participants who are still doing training in years 4 and 5. So just know that that's sort of how we talk about the distinctions in the budget. There is a difference, right, in maximum allowable amounts for induction between our 16 and 17 cohorts versus our 18 and 21 cohorts, for good reason, because induction is now 2 years and expected to be, and not just 1. So now I want to talk a little bit about, I want to shift gears and have you guys have some time to talk. Let's go to the next slide.
And as you start that, there was one question on budget.
Okay. Yeah.
How soon after the cohort is seated do they need to submit any budget revisions?
So I've talked about that with folks during post-award calls. So if you don't recall what that was in our post-award discussion, you can loop back to me about it because it really was variable for some of you, depending on when you planned to do, to actually place participants in your programs. And I'll leave it at that for now. So yeah, there's no other time outside of what I've shared with people one-on-one. So induction services and service payback. Over the next couple of months, I'm looking forward, one, hopefully in our next session to be able to share lots of good data that Karen and the team have been collecting and aggregating and in a manner for us to be able to kind of share out trends and patterns of what we're seeing for the program at RIT. And in the following months after that, we've got some plans to invite our colleagues across the department that support comparable programs and induction activities. And so in a lead up to that, I'd like to talk a little bit and have you guys talk amongst yourselves about just these very issues. So the first question I'm going to ask you guys to talk about is what partners do you have or are considering having around delivering induction services and how do they support the activities? 2, what plans or current induction activities are you undertaking for participants who end up teaching someplace far away, you know, another state, another just, or even in the same state, but they're really on the other side of the state. And then third, what is one strategy that you use or would consider using to support employers gaining a greater understanding of their roles and responsibilities around verifying employment of your participants? So 3 quick questions. I think we can give you guys about 12 minutes or so for this and a really quick report out. So at the outset, identify who will report out because you'll have about a minute to do it. Briefly introduce yourselves to one another and then just take the time to, you know, do round robin and answer these questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Synergy team to.
We've got your questions posted in the chat if you need to refer to them, and I'm going to open up the rooms.
Thanks, Alani.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome back, everybody. Everybody else should be back in about 5 seconds, literally. All right. Well, I think the gang's all here, so I'll
Are we
turn it
good?
back over to the slide deck.
Just get
Okay,
that-
so I'm gonna start us off with the breakout real quick because I know we only have a couple minutes left. So I told them I'd let them off the hook this time, and I was with Jennifer and Leilani and Patricia. I'll just mention quickly, some really great points were raised in terms of induction activities. They're working with partners, meaning schools, focused on the participants on sort of a case management approach, of going and doing check-ins, checking in with the leadership at the school, making sure that everything's going well, conducting site visits to the school. So really sort of nurturing a partnership with the districts where their folks are placed. Of course, mentoring. And I heard a lot of variation in terms of what works, mentoring with experienced mentors, peer-to-peer mentors, because sometimes, the pressure of having to, work with somebody really veteran might be a little alleviated when you're working with just your peers and there's a little camaraderie already there. So there's also the peer mentoring. Grow your own, where they're starting to use some of their recently graduated teachers to become mentors, both to undergrads as well as high school folks. So, starting to build and the idea of nurturing that pipeline. And then, featured speakers. So a lot of induction activities that they're doing and drawing on local partners for. And I'll turn it over to who else? How many other breakouts did we have?
They were
We
just
had
today.
All right, so who's our other?
I can go for my group. So I had a really great discussion. They talked about visiting classrooms, definitely partnerships with, departments of education, and already partnering with what was going on there, being looped into some bigger work around virtual meetings, whether it's class management, and a lot of maybe support around trauma and mental health, making sure that their teachers are getting that type of training. Also, mentors, like you said, different forms of developing mentors for the teachers. And also another thing I thought was interesting is when they get into induction, really requiring a certain level of participation in ongoing training. And so making it a part of the agreement that they participate in 85% of the offerings of ongoing training when they're in that induction period. And also meeting with both the LEA, schools, mentor, and the teacher to really go over the responsibilities of each party and remind the school that they are, that basically the students have a loan, the teachers have a loan, and it's their responsibility to make sure that they're doing, all the reporting and making sure that's, so really at the beginning, bringing all the parties together to make sure that they're aware of their responsibilities in the induction phase.
Thank you, Alani. Did we have any others, or is that it?
There's one more.
Okay.
did have one more, and Kelly, I know had a few technical glitches, but Kelly, did you catch enough to share, or did you want one of us to fill in the blanks?
Unfortunately, Tracy, I missed a lot of it. I got disconnected 3 different times.
Oh, I'm so
if
sorry.
you could fill in, yes. So if you could fill that in for me, that would be wonderful.
Sure. We had some good exchanges between new grantees as well as some veteran grantees. So some different ideas were shared about the format and process of the induction activities in light of the shift to virtual and the lack of infrastructure to support that. But using a problem solving format in those virtual sessions was one takeaway takeaway that we had, so that it was really relevant for the participants, making sure that they had specific information and learnings relevant for their context. So in New Mexico, that means, you know, the state approach to bilingual education. In the Northwest, that meant, you know, addressing potentially for administrators emergency responses to various natural disasters. A couple of folks spoke about the critical support that the partners played in being able to deliver and support those virtual sessions for induction were also shared.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. I'm going to say two quick things as we go. If you want to go to the end of year reminders, I'm not going to read that slide. I'm going to just talk about other things as I have that up. One is somebody mentioned, Jennifer, I believe, mentioned how much she appreciated what you guys introduced yesterday, the mentee.com. And I know Beth had put it in our chat. I just wanted to make sure it was in the full chat for everybody, just some software that sort of made it easier to engage people with less pressure, as Jennifer described. The other thing I wanted to mention, which I thought was a really great point, is especially now probably, but I think all the time, you know, there can be the flip side of induction supports, and Leilani raised this, which was great, around the issue of, you know, they actually get a lot of mentors during their induction period, either from the school or from some other programs, and sometimes it becomes too much. And so I just wanted to mention this to everybody that, you know, if you find yourselves in that position where something you plan to do is already being supported, rather than duplicating effort, you know, if you feel like it's feasible, working with that other entity as a potential partner and, you know, combining resources, meaning using your resources to leverage being able to support them in a more streamlined fashion. So you have that flexibility to move some of that around if there's a better way to deliver that service, or an alternate service if it turns out it's redundant. But, you know, the last thing you want to do is overburden, to Leilani's point, overburden the participants. I know they put mentee.com in the chat box, and you might want to take a look at that if you aren't familiar with it. Let's go to the next slide. Just real quick, we've got upcoming events, the office hours, which we have every week, or every fourth Thursday, I'm sorry, of each month. Our next dates for talking circles, and I'll share more in the next couple of weeks on those. And then finally, let's go ahead and keep running through these. We can go to the last slide. And again, thank you. I know we're 4 minutes over time, and it's Friday. So I want to let you all go, but I hope this has been helpful and to kind of hear a little bit. And if you have some thoughts about what you'd like to hear more about or for in anticipation of future events to talk about induction, I'm happy to entertain those. So feel free to shoot me an email if you think that would be helpful to want to hear or learn more from others. All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Angela.